take you way back to the year of 1972. I believe it was in the mid-August. A little bit of backstory about this property. The reason for the settlement here, my mother and my father agreed to packing up their children and themselves and moving out of there because there was really nothing there for education. There was not much there for work for my father, and I think the school that was up in that area, I think it went to like a grade 6, grade 7 level. I always thank my mom for finding the courage to do that, to move us out of there, yet so much of her memories are from that area. She misses that place. Down this way they came, they come on to an opportunity to buy land, this farm. We've owned this farm for over 62, 63 years now. I remember being 4 years old, and there's a couple things I should add into this too. There was quite a few people in our yard at that point. I come from a large family, and all of us siblings are all from the same mother and father, because there are 11 of us, right? There are 7 girls and 4 boys. I am the youngest of the 11. So I have 3 other brothers, older brothers, and then I have 7 sisters. And there was quite a few people here. It was an experience shared by quite a few people. My first experience. Not all my siblings were here. Some of them were already old enough to leave, and they lived on their own. My oldest sister, her and her husband and her 3 children lived right in our yard in a house. My sister had purchased a homestead, and they were working at building their house and everything there, and they were living in our yard at the time. There was about 10 people here when this happened. We were having supper. My older siblings were out. They had already eaten, and they were already outside, and they were playing in the backyard, and some were further back and they were in the trees. I was in the house with my parents, some of my siblings, and I remember hearing this noise. It started. It wasn't very loud at first, and then it just increased in volume. What we thought initially was, of course, we had dogs. This is what we thought it was. It sounded horrible. It sounded like they were literally killing each other, and we all jumped up. I remember being right next to my mother. I remember hearing my mom's, and I'm not sure who she said this to, but she said, grab a pail of water. And at the time, I wasn't sure. I didn't understand what the pail of water had to do with dogs fighting. I found out later was, instead of beating your dogs if they all start fighting, was they just threw water, cold water, and it just instantly, the dogs quit fighting. Off we went out to the front, and we thought we were going to come onto the dogs fighting. It seemed too loud for the dogs. We made our way out the front door, because as we get to the front and we open that front door to go out onto this little cement step in the front of the house, our dog comes tearing into the house and went right under our table, and he immediately started urinating on the floor. We just froze because we realized the sound was coming not from near our house or even in our yard. It was coming from across in that forest where my lean-to was demolished. That's where the sounds were coming from. Then we realized how loud this was and how big the volume of these noises that was coming from those trees. It just continued. We thought maybe it was wolves at first fighting. It went from that sound. If any of you have ever heard the Sierra sounds, Sierra Nevada, if you haven't, go check them out. It went from the sound of dogs or a pack of dogs fighting to those sounds. It sounds like, I've heard a lot of people make reference to samurai chatter. When you hear the Sierra sounds, just mix in screaming, like a witch screaming, a cackling sound like a hyena or a witch cackle. In with the samurai chatter. Oh my God. I'm hanging on to my mom's thigh, her leg. I'm stunned. We're listening to this. Every hair on your head and on the back of your neck is standing up on end. Again, the volume, right? It was just to the point where you wanted to just cover your ears. The crazy part is when I think back and remember the sound. I can remember this like it was, yesterday or 2 days ago. It's so fresh in my memory. And the rest of the family too that was there that experienced this, they say, I'll never forget. It's like a quarter of a mile from us, yet it sounded like it was right around us. And that was, I think, why we thought it was the dogs too when we were having supper. And we all jumped up from the table because it sounded like it was right outside our house. So this continued, like it did not stop. And of course, 1972, like I always think back and I wished we could have had like a tape recorder or something. And I think back then it was rare for anybody to even have a cassette player. Cassette players that you slide the cassette in and you push record with the two buttons. That was one of the things a lot of the family talked about, was like, too bad we didn't have something that we could have captured these sounds, right? And then the whole situation changed. I had mentioned my sister and her husband and her 3 children living in our yard. He come out with his rifle and he has the idea he's going to go back there. My dad says, no, you're not going. Don't be going out there like you're crazy. My dad knew. He understood. He had a Border Collie cross dog with him. He put the leash on the dog. That was one of the memories that stuck in my mind. The dog. He had the rifle. He had the dog on the leash and he was trying to coax his dog to come with him. There was no way he wanted to go. In the meantime, our other dog, our bear dog, he's in the house, shaking and trembling under the table. Up in that area where my relatives and my ancestors are from, where my parents grew up, I forgot to mention in that story, somebody had asked me, did my grandfather leave them a rifle, a thing for protection? And he didn't, because my grandma wouldn't use a gun. They had 4 dogs with them. Grandpa left the dogs with grandma. What was interesting, I'm just going to add this in here into the story. What was interesting, dogs didn't make a sound. They didn't want to have any part of that Bigfoot that my grandmother seen on the trail. So here, I'm watching my brother-in-law drag this dog with him, and he did go. I watched him. I remember seeing him go across the road. He disappeared into the trees. Sound is still going on. It sounds like they're throwing trees, like they're pushing trees over. I was thinking, did they get him? Did this thing get him? And being 4 years old, I wasn't even sure what that was. 30 seconds later, it seemed like forever, but he come back out, and then he turned, he spun around. He went back in, and the dog come out. He come out of the bush right after the dog, and he spun around again, looked in there. Dog was a quarter of a mile ahead of him. He was already in the yard before my brother-in-law even got close. Stayed around. Everybody there just kind of sat there, and he made his way back. He really wouldn't talk about it. I found out just here within the last 5-6 years, he came forward and he started talking about what he experienced back there. There was movement. He couldn't get a good look at it, but every time he would go to leave, one of these come running towards him as he got out, made his way out of the bush. He'd run out, turn around, he could hear it go back in, and so he went back in, and he'd turn around to leave again, and one of them would come running towards him, and he said he couldn't get a clear view of what it was, but they could come at him on all 4s and be in that underbrush. He didn't talk about that till here just 5-6 years ago, and admitted that how scared he was. At that point, some of my siblings were, in different areas in the yard, and by that time, everybody was congregated in the front of the house. I had a sister that stayed in and watched from the window. Once my brother-in-law made it back to the yard, we could hear these things moving further east. My father, he believed there was 2 groups come on to each other, and there was a fight. Just by what we were hearing, like the trees being thrown and the screaming. Like it wasn't just one screaming, I have never heard anything like what we've heard. The Sierra sounds are the closest. That will give you an idea of what we heard. I have family members who have come on to those sounds, those Sierra Nevada sounds. Some of them can't even listen to it. They won't even finish listening to the audio. And that's interesting because it kind of gives you an idea of how it affected certain ones that were there for the experience. That's exactly what we heard. Mix in all the screaming and the yelling and the roaring and the hyena cackles, and we're not sure how many of them there were. Where those sounds was where the grave mounds, that might have had something to do with it as well. I don't know. Maybe this other group come through, or was it breeding season for them? We don't know enough about them yet. So, but we listened to it disappear going east for a long period of time. After it settled down, everybody went into their houses. Nobody said a whole lot about anything. I think everybody just sat and tried to make sense of what we just experienced. Nothing was said. It was very quiet. Nobody spoke too much about anything. I imagine my mother and father had a talk later once we were all in bed and sleeping. And that's usually when they had their good conversations, right? We found out a few days later, my oldest brother, the woman that he married, her family, lived about 10 miles to the east of here. That next morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, they were woken up to screaming outside their farm. They had quite a few horses that on their farm, and the horses bolted. They broke fences and they disappeared. They headed south into trees. The screaming and the roaring, and then they said it sounded like hyenas outside their house. And it was very interesting because whatever was happening here continued east for 10 miles. And maybe this group was chasing, it could have been chasing something out. Like my dad was thinking it was two groups fighting, a rogue male coming through the area and onto this clan here, and they didn't want him here. There's so many scenarios that we were thinking of why they would have did this. There's a lot of things going on here before that and after, but nothing to that extreme, right? Nothing to that extreme. It was one of those events in your life that it stayed with me forever. I believe it's led me down this path. And from that point on, being a 4-year-old little boy, from that point on, I was always looking, right? I was always looking into the trees, looking at the shadows, something that might look like a Bigfoot or sound like a Bigfoot. We've seen them moving through the trees years later. So I do have other stories about things happening right here in the yard, and I will share those at some point. But this was my first experience. This was the one that set the stage for all things to follow. We still believe there was a fight. Maybe it was a disagreement. Maybe it was a battle. I don't know. Maybe it was a fight for territory. I know a lot of you have had your own experiences and encounters, and when I say to you, it changes your life. And I think this is where a lot of people, they are afraid to accept that these things might be real, or that something like that is possible, because then it alters your perception, and you have to look at the world around you differently. And a lot of people do not handle change that well, and they want to stay protected and in that bubble, and everything's the same, and they're too afraid to move beyond that, right? They're too afraid. Okay, I'll leave it there, and I hope you enjoy the story. I have a couple more coming for you. We're still in the middle of a deep freeze. Oh my goodness, it's been so cold. It's just been cold, bitter cold. I've been trying to keep my animals alive, keeping them warm, heat lamps, heaters. Some of them have coats. Sammy's inside. Bigfoot are not coming to the gifting bowl. It's too cold. I'm really starting to believe that they're able to come here. They can come in orb form or spirit form. I wish you all the best of the new year coming up, and hopefully it is a better new year than what we've all been enduring. It's been tough, but hopefully this next year is a little bit less stressful, and we'll see you in the trees. Bye for now.